Eternal Fascism is a renowned essay authored by the Italian philosopher, novelist, and semiotician Umberto Eco. First published in 1995, this influential essay provides a comprehensive analysis of fascism, the definition of fascism, and discussing its fundamental characteristics and traits. Drawing on Eco's personal experiences growing up in Mussolini's Italy and his extensive research on fascist movements, the essay offers valuable insights into the nature of fascism and its manifestations. Eco grew up in Italy under Mussolini's fascist dictatorship, and his introduction to fascism was in grade school reciting fascist loyalty pledges. He witnessed firsthand the impact that fascist political thought had on his nation and the effect of its subsequent collapse and his nation's attempt to make sense of itself in the aftermath. These experiences led him to try and understand the nature of fascism, and he argues that there is no essence of fascism. Rather, we should understand fascism as being a set of political and social traits that bear a family resemblance to each other. He outlines 14 of these traits that he collectively calls Ur-Fascism. Eco's principal thesis is that fascism is not a unique ideology that has come and gone, but a recurring phenomenon rooted in human psyche and emotions, a disease, a parasite, a sickness in the heart of man. Like many diseases, it presents itself through several symptoms but has one core origin. He says, fascism became an all-purpose term because one can eliminate from a fascist regime one or more features and it will still be recognizable as fascist. Take away imperialism from fascism and you still have Franco and Salazar. Take away colonialism and you still have the Balkan fascism of the Ustaches. Add to this Italian fascism a radical anti-capitalism which never much fascinated Mussolini and you have Ezra Pound. Add a cult of Celtic mythology and the Grail mysticism completely alien to official fascism and you have one of the most respected fascist gurus, Julius Evola. Eco outlines 14 key elements or traits which he refers to as ways that commonly appear in fascist movements. While not all of these traits are present in every fascist movement, together they create a recognizable pattern. He says, but in spite of this fuzziness, I think it is possible to outline a list of features that are typical of what I would call Ur-Fascism or eternal fascism. These features cannot be organized into a system. Many of them contradict each other and are also typical of other kinds of despotism or fanaticism, but it is enough that one of them be present to allow fascism to coagulate around it. The first feature of Ur-Fascism is the cult of tradition, characterized by cultural syncretism, even at the risk of internal contradiction. When all truth has already been revealed by tradition, no new learning can occur, only further interpretation and refinement. The second trait is the rejection of modernism, which views this rationalistic development of Western culture since the Enlightenment as a descent into depravity. Eco distinguishes this from a rejection of superficial technological advancement, as many fascist regimes cite their industrial potency as proof of the vitality of their system. The third trait is the cult of action for action's sake, which dictates that action is of value in itself and should be taken without intellectual reflection. This, says Eco, is connected with anti-intellectualism and irrationalism and often manifests its attacks on modern culture and science. The fourth is that disagreement is treason. Fascism devalues intellectual discourse and critical reasoning as barriers to action, as well as out of fear that such analysis will expose the contradictions embodied in a syncretistic faith. The fifth is fear of defense, which fascism seeks to exploit and exacerbate, often in the form of racism or an appeal against foreigners and immigrants. The sixth trait of fascism is the appeal to a frustrated middle class, fearing economic pressure from the demands and aspirations of lower social groups. The seventh, obsession with the plot and the hyping up of an enemy threat. This often combines an appeal to xenophobia with the fear of disloyalty and sabotage from marginalized groups living within the society. Moving on, the eighth trait is that fascist societies rhetorically cast their enemies as at the same time too strong and too weak. On the one hand, fascists play up the power of certain disfavored elites to encourage in their followers a sense of grievance and humiliation, and on the other hand, fascist leaders point to the decadence of those elites as proof of their ultimate feebleness in the face of an overwhelming popular will. The ninth is that pacifism is trafficking with the enemy because life is permanent warfare. There must always be an enemy to fight. Both fascist Germany under Hitler and Italy under Mussolini worked first to organize and clean up their respective countries and then build the war machines that they later intended to and did use, despite Germany being under restrictions of the Versailles Treaty, to not build a military force. This principle leads to a fundamental contradiction with fascism, the incompatibility of ultimate triumph with perpetual war. The tenth is that there is a contempt for the weak, which is uncomfortably married to a popular elitism in which every member of society is superior to outsiders by virtue of belonging to the in group. Eco sees this in these attitudes the root of a deep tension in the fundamentally hierarchical structure of fascist polities, as they encourage leaders to despise their underlings up to the ultimate leader who holds the whole country in contempt for having allowed him to overtake it by force. The 11th trait is that everybody is educated to become a hero, which leads to the embrace of a cult of death. As Eco observes, the Ur-Fascist hero is impatient to die. In his impatience, he more frequently sends other people to death. The 12th is machismo, which sublimates the difficult work of permanent war and heroism into the sexual sphere. Eco says, since both permanent war and heroism are difficult games to play, the Ur-Fascist transfers his will to power to sexual matters. This is the origin of machismo, which implies both disdain for women and intolerance and condemnation of non-standard sexual habits from chastity to homosexuality. Since even sex is a difficult game to play, the Ur-Fascist hero tends to play with weapons. The 13th trait is that selective populism. The people conceived monolithically have a common will, distinct from and superior to the viewpoint of any individual. As no mass of people can ever be truly unanimous, the leader holds himself out as the interpreter of the popular will, though truly he alone dictates it. Fascists use this concept to delegitimize democratic institutions they accuse of no longer representing the voice of the people. And the last trait of fascism is newspeak. Fascism employs and promotes an impoverished vocabulary in order to limit critical understanding and critical reasoning as well. Eco says, Ur-Fascism speaks newspeak. Newspeak was invented by Orwell in 1984, but elements of Ur-Fascism are common to different forms of dictatorship. All the Nazi or fascist school books made use of an impoverished vocabulary and an elementary syntax in order to limit the instruments for complex and critical reasoning. But we must be ready to identify other kinds of newspeak, even if they take the apparently innocent form of a popular talk show.